Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched, where this week I watched Wild at Heart from 1990. Now, this week we unfortunately mourn the passing of my favorite weather forecaster, David Lynch. Some of you will get that. Who is an interesting individual, to say the least. Somebody with a storied and influential history, though largely with not a lot of commercial success over the years. He's kind of a strange individual, or was, I suppose, now. And in my experience, my experience in watching his content is somewhat limited, but it's growing. In my experience, watching a David Lynch anything is watching weird people do weird stuff in situations that are less than ideal. And for that, I admire him and always have, because there are fundamentally not a lot of people who make movies like that, make commercial content, commercial media of any kind, that are just well and truly and unapologetically weird. This is a particularly weird entry in his cinematic history, I think. Probably not the strangest on its face, but certainly the one that's, from what I've seen, maybe the most detached. It wavers between reality and fantasy, and just sort of doesn't adhere to any kind of narrative, literal, figurative sense. It's very much doing whatever it wants whenever it wants. But that's not to say that it doesn't seem to have very direct intention behind it. I'm fundamentally still processing this movie, and I think I will be for a while. And I think it will be some time before I watch it again, but I will have to watch it again, because this is a weird, weird film. And to be totally honest, I'm not even sure how to talk about it right now. So let me go down some of the more obvious technical things I can talk about. This is a fairly budget film. I think it's listed at about $10 million. That seems to more or less check out. I'm guessing a lot of that probably went to the cast. This is actually a fairly star-studded cast, although a lot of the people who are in this and were eventually, they're stars because this was early in their careers in a lot of cases. So the lead duo of Nick Cage and Laura Dern, well, I'll get back to them. I think they're fantastic. But there's a whole bunch of other people in here whose name you've probably heard of. Willem Dafoe, Crispin Glover, Harry Dean Stanton is a constant staple in David Lynch's productions, and just sort of somebody who's very recognizable, and sort of a sleeper actor. Somebody who you never quite know what he's an actor's actor in a way. I kind of hate that phrase, but he's very good at playing kind of a variety of different characters, but you never quite remember them that clearly. They're always kind of hazy. But I actually grabbed this thinking it was a different movie, because both these movies were on my list, but the movie I thought this was, or that I was mixing it up with, was Raising Arizona, which is one of the Coen brothers movies, who I've mentioned before I love very much, that I have not seen yet. And so actually I was thinking it was a different movie, not realizing they weren't the same movie. But I will have to go and watch that as well at some other point. But especially knowing a tiny bit about each movie. I didn't realize, like, in whatever part of my brain had sort of half processed that, I didn't realize they were two different movies when I was going into it, and was slightly surprised at some of the tonal set pieces that happen right up front in the movie, not having quite figured out that this was not in any way at all Raising Arizona, despite having a wild-haired young Nicolas Cage in it. So that was just slightly weird off the bat. I don't actually know how many times Nick Cage has worked with David Lynch. I don't think I've seen him in anything else by David Lynch, but to me, I think I would love to see anything else that they did together. To me, the sort of fundamental madness of Lynch's writing and directing styles, and the, I don't want to say bizarre and off the wall, those are the words that came to mind immediately, but I don't think people understand Nicolas Cage. I've talked about him before, I think, on this show, and he's not just being a wild and wacky guy. Okay, sometimes he is. I'm pretty sure in what's the one where he's the flaming skull? That one, I'm pretty sure he's phoning it in because he thinks it's funny. But when he's actually putting in an effort to actually act, I think people don't understand what he's doing. And often directors don't even understand what he's doing, but they just let him do it anyway. To me, Lynch directs in a way that seems to be perfectly in sync with Cage. I love the sort of synergy of Lynch's directing with Cage's acting and Laura Dern's acting as well. Dern and Cage together have it. I don't want to say like they have great chemistry. They do and they don't, because fundamentally this movie is not that much about having like a really clear, well-defined character who has a lot of like direct growth and sort of things. This is a fairly like short, this movie happens over a fairly short period of time. Well, mostly a fairly short period of time. And this is more of a single set of events that happen in a couple of people's lives than an actual like whole character growth. And yet at the same time, they have such a dynamic together, and play off each other so well. I just really love the synergy they have as actors and the way that works with the writing and directorship and everything else that sort of surrounds them. We'll keep talking about the technical stuff. Fundamentally, like, even when Lynch has more money than he has here, his content is always shot very gritty and raw. And I mean that in a more traditional sense than it's often used these days. I mean, it's gritty to the level of being like kind of dirty and gross. And that always seems to be fairly deliberate. It's not for lack of effort or lack of care. It's just a sort of stylistic choice, I think, that seems to work very well for the narratives he tries to tell and the types of people he likes to write about. But some of the production elements on this movie do seem intensely cheap. Some of them are like totally very good, well done, good sets and location stuff and those sorts of things. But some of it is like so rough that it feels almost like it was a pickup shot or something, but it's for pretty substantial scenes. So there are little production elements that I think are a bit rougher than they need to be. I am very curious whether there were actually limitations there, or this was just what he was directly shooting for. But yeah, curiosity there. This is not early in Lynch's career, but it's not late either. So he already has some stuff under his belt, but like he's not a hugely lauded director at this point. Not that he ever really was, but he's a well-known name. And so yeah, I just there's certain production elements that I would have liked to see maybe have a little more polish on shots or production things. And then there's other things that are just like, sometimes you wonder with Lynch whether it's deliberate or not. Like a very obvious fake nose that I'm not going to mention any more than that, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And you look at it and you go, that's got to be on purpose. But it's so strange. And so sometimes with Lynch, you just kind of don't know whether he's just making a strange but kind of interesting artistic choice, or if they're just, they're just doing something on the cheap, on the fly, because in his auteur brain, that thing doesn't matter, or only matters in a way that's different than everybody else tends to think. So as far as the actual content and the narrative of the film, it's a pretty simple narrative overall. But often with Lynch, a lot of things are about interpretation and metaphor and subtext. And I think a lot of the editing style of this movie in particular goes to serve exactly that. That the repeated and aggressive use of flashbacks, memories, vignettes, these other things that are like sort of uncomfortably common and out of the ordinary. It would seem odd in a traditional Hollywood film. Those are, I think, aggressive both for stylistic reasons and for narrative reasons because of what he is trying to say and portray. This is a story of people who are put in uncomfortable positions around other people who are not good people. It's a lot of people with very gray morality, some better and worse than others, and a lot of, psychosis and bizarre mental whatever going on with pretty much every character. And seeing all these, I don't want to say wacky because it sounds a little demeaning, but like these sort of sometimes very over the top ideas of individuals really play off each other in fascinating ways, to tell a fairly simple story under the surface. This is the kind of thing where sometimes it's actually funny. I realized I was mixing it up with a Coen Brothers movie, because this is a story that I would love to kind of see if it was interpreted by the Coens instead. This is very much sort of up their directorial alley, as well as I would say probably a Tarantino type of thing. And to see the same story told by any story really, but this one has it's the one in front of me, told by those three sets of directors, and their various interpretations and the way that the types of stories that they tend to tell, and the their directorial aggression, their willingness to not be within the standards of typical Hollywood films. I would love to have seen what others could do with it as well. Just because I can see there are individual scenes in this film where I go, oh, this looks just like, well, not exactly, but it looks a lot like the kind of thing that Tarantino would really enjoy shooting, or the Coens would really enjoy shooting, or something like that. And there's just sort of a lot of parallels between those three sets of directors and in their writing as well, that it just, had me thinking about it more than a few times. A lot of the narrative is very heavily metaphorical, and I'm going to point again to Tarantino on this. I think often if people have problems with Tarantino, it's usually because they don't understand why he does what he does. If there's a scene of grotesque violence, it's usually not for the sake of the grotesque violence. It's because he's saying something else about the scene. And whether it's to be taken seriously or absurdly, the sort of the subtext is what's usually important rather than what's directly on screen. And I think Lynch takes that to an even greater extent, where it is not just subtext. It can be very heavily more metaphorical, or even just overt narrative telling in a way that is indirect. I don't know how to explain it better than that. There's a couple of things in this film, recurring little clips and vignettes that are used to sort of trigger your memory back to things that were shown or suggested before, that it's very deeply sort of steeped in this interwoven metaphor that runs throughout the entire film. And likewise, I think Lynch really likes to talk about other media. So the references that exist and this sort of semi-level of cultural literacy required to watch this film and go, okay, what's this movie about? What's the other piece of media that they're referring to this movie about? How does the ideas and narrative intentions of that other piece of media reflect upon how the character in this movie understands both that media in world and how it implies other things about their worldview and their intentions and what drives them. So while this is very much a movie about a bunch of broken, strange people who are sort of have their various drives that come into conflict with each other, it is simultaneously it's a weirdly depressing but also weirdly hopeful movie. I'm not going to say it's always consistent with that, or that it does a fantastic job of convincing you that you should feel one way or the other, or somehow both at the same time. But I think sometimes the whiplash is on purpose to sort of give you the sense of unease, the sense of disruption, to really get it through you how much the characters have been through and their sort of strange set of emotional states that they vacillate between. And I think that's really served well by some really great actors. I talked about Cage and Dern already, who are just fantastic. Another side note, if you want to see Dafoe at possibly, I haven't seen everything he's ever done, but it's possibly his most bizarre and grotesque. If you think Willem Dafoe has a weird looking face, his face is extra strange in this movie. And they play it up very much on purpose. It's so weird. Yeah, I'm sure I could keep rambling on about this movie because it's so weird, and I'm gonna keep processing it for a while. If you like if you like David Lynch movies, if you like Nicolas Cage movies, I almost said David Cage. Please forget that I didn't. Forget everything about that. David Lynch as a writer or director, or Nicolas Cage as an actor, then by all means, I think you'll get something really interesting out of this. Man, people forget the kind of stuff Laura Dern was in before, like, the modern era. The type of stuff she's been in the last like 20 years is much more traditional. The stuff she did when she was a younger actor is like a lot of wacky stuff. She's a fantastic actor. Anyway, I'm going to try and stop rambling about this movie, but it's very odd. It's very scrappy and weird. But if you're watching it at all, and if you've watched to the end of this video, you probably already know that and are probably maybe interested in it. It's a strange one, and yeah, I recommend it. If you need content warnings, though, it's got a lot of content that needs warning about, so be aware of that. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'll see you guys next time.